are you? I'm going to tell you a story today about a lady and a man, and their names are Mr and Mrs Doddipole. Doddipole, yeah, Mr and Mrs Doddipole. That's a funny name, isn't it? And in the story, they have lots of babies. And you know, when you have a baby, when a mummy and a daddy have a baby, they have to think of a name for the baby, don't they? So when you were a baby, your mummy or your daddy, they thought of a name for you. Yeah? So my name is Jo. What's your name? Is it? Oh, that's a really nice name. Your mummy or your daddy chose really well. So I'm going to pretend that Teddy is my baby. And I'm going to be Mrs Doddipole. I'm going to wrap my Teddy up in my scarf, just like a baby. How's this? There, oh, little baby. And Mr and Mrs Doddipole's first baby was a baby boy. It was a very long baby. Mr Doddipole said, "What shall we call him?" Mrs Doddipole said, "John. It's a good, honest name." So they called him John. Now, the next year, Mr and Mrs Doddipole had another baby boy. Mr Doddipole looked at the baby. "What shall we call him?" said Mr Doddipole. "John," said Mrs Doddipole. "It's a good, honest name." "But we've already got one John," said Mr Doddipole. "Yes," said Mrs Doddipole, "but this baby is very short, so we could have Long John and Short John." And that's exactly what they did. Now another year passed, and yes, you guessed it, another baby boy. Mr Doddipole looked at the baby. "Oh," he said, "what shall we call him?" "John," said Mrs Doddipole. "It's a good, honest name." "But we've already got Long John," said Mr Doddipole. "And Short John," said Long John. Short John just said, "Baby." "Yes," said Mrs Doddipole, "but this baby's quite plump. This baby's quite tubby. We'll call him Tubby John." And so they did. Another year passed, and then Mrs Doddipole had another baby. Yes, another baby boy. Mr Doddipole looked at the baby. What shall we call him?" he said. "John," said Mrs Doddipole. "It's a good, honest name." "But we've already got Long John," said Mr Doddipole. "And Short John," said Long John. "And Tubby John," said Short John. Tubby John just said, "Baby." "Yes," said Mrs Doddipole, "but this baby is quite thin. This baby is quite skinny. We could call him Skinny John." And so they did. Another year, another baby. But heavens above, this time the baby is a girl. "Oh," said Mr Doddipole, "what shall we call her?" "John," said Mrs Doddipole. "It's a good, honest name." "But we've already got Long John," said Mr Doddipole. "And Short John," said Long John. "And Tubby John," said Short John. "And Skinny John," said Tubby John. Skinny John looked at the baby and said, "Baby." "No," said Mr Doddipole, "we will call her Jane." Said Mrs Doddipole. And so they did. But do you know, the John Doddipoles never called her by her real name. They grew up to be young men. They grew up to be middle-aged men. They lived to be old men. And they always treated their sister really, really well. but they never ever called her by her real name. Not Long John, not Short John, not Tubby John, not Skinny John. They never ever called her Jane. Can you guess what they did call her? Can you guess? Yes, they called her Girl John. After all, it is a good, honest name. What do you think? If you were Jane, how would you feel about being called Girl John? I think I would be a bit cross. Snip, snap, snover. My story's over. I hope you enjoyed it.